show. Ian Rankin's back with a new thriller and Kate Goldie is here with her verdict in this week's Paper Plus book review. Kate, what did you think of it?
Oh, excellent. And it's a big ask, actually, because Ian Rankin was so famous for his Rebus books, and the Rebus fans became very connected to him as a character. So it was a big ask for Ian Rankin to begin with his new character, Malcolm Fox, who works in the branch of the police called the Complaints. They're the investigative branch. They investigate police misdemeanours.
Oh, okay.
And this is the second book with Malcolm Fox.
Is that a real name of a
yes,
branch?
Yes, I think it is in Scotland. It's not the formal name for the branch that he works for, but that's what all the other policemen call
Complaints.
The Complaints. And he's an interesting character, Fox, as interesting as Rebus was, but different. He's a reformed, or he's a recovering alcoholic. He's a serious guy. There's a side story about him looking after his elderly father and his relationship with his sister. But this particular story has two parts to it. Initially, he and his team are investigating some cops who may or may not have assisted in another corrupt cop's misdemeanours. So they've come to Fife from Edinburgh to investigate that. No, Kirkcaldy they're in. And at the same time, the policeman that they're investigating had been dobbed in by his ex-policeman uncle. Fox goes to visit this uncle, who's an interesting character, and then he's later killed by a gun that would seemingly not be able to be in existence. That's why it's called the Impossible Dead. A weapon has been used that shouldn't exist. And that takes Fox on an interesting investigation into the past, into about 1985, when Scottish nationalists and anti-nuclear activists were performing acts of terrorism in Scotland. And that's a really interesting part of the book. You might have heard recently on in different media the man who's written the story of his aunt Hilda Murrell, who may have been killed by MI5 in Britain. Well, she's mentioned in this book. It's from the same period.
So there's a bit of reality in there? Or a bit
absolutely, yeah. And so that's quite fascinating. So he ends up not only investigating the current complaint, but this a murder in the past that was unsolved. And it's a very interesting read, actually. I found it really absorbing. So it's an entirely successful invention, this new Rankin character, I think, so I recommend it highly.
So for all Rankin fans, obviously, but for any other sort of, who else do you think would enjoy it?
Any thriller, police procedural fan, it's very good. And having just been to Scotland, I just love reading about all the streets
that you've seen.
Where I've actually seen. Yeah, so that was
you're
good
so
fun.
lucky. Moving on to our next book, How to Live.
How to Live, the subtitle of which is A Life of Montaigne in 1 question and 20 attempts at an answer, which is a great subtitle. Montaigne was sort of, I guess you would say he was the inventor of a literary form. He more or less invented the personal essay back in the 16th century. Fascinating character, a sort of reluctant politician, a lawyer, a thinker and a writer. And a middle-class Frenchman, middle to upper class. And as a consequence of a near-death experience that he had, his sort of view of life changed, and he started writing about the world around him. And what Sarah Blakewell is doing in this book is giving us a kind of an unusual biography of Montaigne and looking at the kind of essays that he wrote, and then looking also at the response to the essays over the years from other writers and readers. He's an absolutely seminal literary figure, even though a lot of the time people haven't heard of him. So she starts off by saying that there's a kind of a connection between bloggers who are writing their thoughts frantically all the time around the world and Montaigne, who really did start that approach to looking at life through one's own experience of it. So in his essays, he'll be looking at literally how to live. Take it easy, don't worry about death. He looks at the world around him, he looks at his responses to the world around him. So it's the personal essay as we come to know it.
What do you mean by don't worry about death?
But it's pointless. You should live, he's sort of saying live in the moment and kind of take it easy, but absorb the world and be acutely aware of it. So in order to live well, be attentive to the world, which is also the kind of instruction one would give to a writer. But he's saying it's for all humanity. Observe closely everything that's happening around you and your own responses to it. So she takes us through his life, his response to his life through his writing, and also looks at how that writing has influenced other people. And really, in a sense, modern journalism, you know, the kind of gonzo journalism, which is quite personalised, is sort of influenced by Montaigne as well. And she's saying that, you know, the blogosphere these days is connected to him in a sense. He lived in a very, very turbulent time in the, during this sort of religious wars of the 16th century. But he was not apolitical exactly, but in a way turned his face from that and looked at the particular in his life. It's a wonderful read, really absorbing. And
quite intellectual?
Well, no. The thing that really blows you away about Montaigne, there he was writing, is it nearly 500 years ago? So readable. So
even the language, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, human nature never changes.
That's true. Isn't that what they always say?
Yeah. So it's actually a very positive and affirming book to read in that respect. So finally, Burning Bright. Ron Rash, I reviewed his book One Foot in Eden earlier this year, I think. He's coming to the International Festival of the Arts in Wellington next year. Wonderful, wonderful writer. He writes about the Appalachians. If I was to sort of say in a sentence what his concerns are, it's with the poor, the disaffected, the kind of lame and the downtrodden in American life. But having said that, these stories, they're bleak, but they're sort of shot through with a kind of celebration of the way we all get through, no matter what's happening to us. They're set across different time frames, Civil War, Depression, but they're sort of telling us something about now all the time as well. He's a lot of the time in his stories, people are fighting against the sort of forces of capitalism that impinge on their lives through big industry, its effect on the landscape, etc., etc. And people are just kind of crafting as carefully as they can a living, just surviving and getting by. He's the most beautiful stylist. He's so humane. The first story, Hard Times, is set in the Depression, and it's about a couple who are utterly concerned because their eggs are being stolen from their hens. It's a matter of life and death, you know, how much food they've got. And it's just a very simple story. They sort of semi-accuse a neighbour, and they think it might be a fox. And when the sort of denouement of the story comes, you're just blown away by who's taking the eggs.
Really?
Oh, it's beautiful and sad and grim, but kind of transforming as well. I really highly recommend them. Read them one at a time over several weeks so that you don't feel overwhelmed by ghastliness.
That's some good advice. Thank you so much, Kate. We'll look forward to catching up with you next time.
See ya.
And this week's Paper Plus book review giveaway is The Impossible Dead by Ian Rankin. To be in to win a copy, just tell us the name of the police force branch that Rankin's hero Malcolm Fox works for. You can enter online or at the address on screen.